Okay, I have to start by telling you that I am a massive fan of the Ace Attorney games. I had never played anything quite like Phoenix Wright when it first arrived in the States. And in all seriousness, that original trilogy actually made me want to become a lawyer myself. I loved seeing Phoenix grow and do what's right, and eventually pass the torch down to Apollo Justice and Athena Sykes. That's why I was so thrilled to finally play the ones I'd missed out on. I was disappointed that the Great Ace Attorney games never came to the West. I wanted to see what Phoenix's ancestor Ryunosuke Naruhodo was all about, how he left Japan as the country opened its borders to the outside world for the first time. In the same manner, his 2 games were finally released outside of Japan, bundled together as the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. Finally, I could experience the Japan-Britain relationship and investigate cases alongside the one and only Sherlock Holmes. I should say Herlock Sholmes. Despite the fact that most of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's stories are in the public domain, it seems Capcom is still trying to avoid any potential lawsuit, so they don't use the Sherlock name. But I've got nothing worth suing over, which means I can bring in a very special guest.
Hello, hello. It is I, the real from the books, Sherlock Holmes. I'm sure you've heard of me. But did you also know I'm very popular in Japan? It's true. Let's see if we can't deduce why.
Spoiler alert, I did not end up becoming a lawyer. Actual spoiler alert though, it's basically impossible to show a visual novel without some spoilers, so be warned that I will be showing the first 4 cases from the first Great Ace Attorney in this video. I have made an effort not to speak directly about any major twists in the cases, but those with a keen eye will probably be able to pick out a few things from what's being shown on screen.
Yes, there are many clues to assemble. The game is afoot.
It totally is. But before we talk about the game, we should talk about the original stories. It's important to ask where Sherlock came from. Then we can trace how his international fame got us to the point of inserting him into the Ace Attorney universe. Some of this may be old hat to you, but let's make sure we're all on the same page. When creating the character of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was inspired by the 2 earliest examples of detectives in literature: Edgar Allan Poe's C. Auguste Dupin and Émile Gaboriau's Monsieur Lecoq. Sir Doyle credits Poe with having invented the detective genre, and Great Ace Attorney 1 actually has Easter eggs for Monsieur Lecoq and his creator. Sir Doyle modeled Sherlock Holmes after these predecessors, as well as real-life gentleman Dr. Joseph Bell, whose medical diagnoses were the basis for Holmes' methods of deduction. He's smart, he's strong, and he solves murders, but he doesn't do it alone. There are a few supporting characters we need to know about for the sake of this video. The most prominent is Dr. John Watson, Sherlock's investigative partner and roommate. In fact, the stories are told from Watson's perspective. Without that, we wouldn't have honest observations about Sherlock's behavior, which one could easily label as eccentric. The other key characters we need to know are Inspectors Lestrade and Gregson. Both are officers from Scotland Yard, and both consult with Holmes on various cases. But Lestrade shows up more often.
Ah, he's the pick of a bad lot, that Lestrade. I like him.
So we've got our origins and our cast. Sir Doyle wrote 4 novels and 56 short stories with Sherlock and his cohorts. But of course you'll find the world's most famous detective in many, many more places than just those 60 works. In fact, he's the most adapted fictional human of all time. And I only say human because Dracula ranks just as high. Maybe that's why Great Ace Attorney antagonist Beric von Zieks looks like he fell straight out of Castlevania into the courtroom. One of my personal favorite adaptations is the BBC show Sherlock, with Benedict Cumberbatch as the titular character. Robert Downey Jr. played Sherlock in the Guy Ritchie movies, and Johnny Lee Miller played him on the CBS series. Those are just Western examples. Miss Sherlock is a modern-day gender swap take that aired for a Japanese audience on HBO Asia. Which brings us to our next important question. How did Sherlock get so big in Japan? Well, the craze started in the late 1800s. Sir Doyle's story, The Man with the Twisted Lip, was translated for Japanese magazine Nippon Jin in 1894. More translations followed, but it's actually the original English language versions that might be responsible for the explosion in popularity. Annotated versions of the Sherlock stories were used to teach Japanese schoolchildren English. In time, some high-ranking individuals even advocated for the original English novels to be required reading. With such a frequency of early encounters with Sherlock Holmes, it's no wonder that the stories got so embedded in the minds of Japanese individuals.
Especially those in elementary school.
Furthermore, the Sherlock Holmes stories arrived in Japan during a time of great cultural change. The Meiji Era of Japan, when the nation first opened up to the outside world, was heavily influenced by Western culture. In fact, it's through this lens that the Great Ace Attorney tells most of its stories. Ryunosuke and his assistant Susato are sent to Great Britain to study its system of law, and their crash course in British culture is a big part of each case. So in many ways, Sherlock's popularity was a right place, right time situation, where the stories began crossing into the Eastern world just as Western influence was starting to take hold. It's not hard to see that influence today either. Here's a subway poster with Holmes' silhouette. Here's a collection of Sherlock-style pipes owned by a fan. Here's a 1995 Maruchan ramen commercial featuring the man himself.
Ha, I do recall filming that one, yes. Don't tell anyone, but I've always preferred Nissin top ramen.
Well, now I'm hungry, but the time has come to take all that we've learned so far and plug it into the actual game. Capcom is obviously aware of Holmes' popularity, both globally and nationally in Japan, so it makes perfect sense to include him in the Great Ace Attorney. His stories coincide with the Meiji Era, when the game is set. However, Holmes' popularity also means Capcom can play around with our expectations for the great detective, and that's why I enjoy this particular take on him so much. The game goes out of its way to subvert Sherlock Holmes and his colleagues. We can start with the very first case. The victim here is Dr. John Wilson, who is clearly an adaptation of John Watson, and the game starts by killing him off. Right away, Capcom lets us know that this isn't your typical Sherlock story. Holmes' expected companion is dead and gone. Instead, he's accompanied by Iris Wilson, a genius child inventor. Not only that, but she's the one who actually writes down all of Sherlock's adventures. She's the true storyteller here, not Dr. Wilson, despite his voice being the one we hear before each case.
A murder in a carriage as it sped through dense London fog in the dead of night.
Inspector Tobias Gregson is mostly unchanged, signified by his name being exactly the same. His fish and chip fixation is quirky, but he's not so far removed from the original character. The same cannot be said for Lestrade, however. In what is easily the most drastic change for a supporting character, adult man G. Lestrade is gender swapped to teenage girl Gina Lestrade. Rather than a respected inspector, she's instead a publicly maligned pickpocket. Her criminal activities are what mix her up with Ryunosuke in the first place. Let's talk about the man himself, Sherlock Holmes, or in this case, Herlock Sholmes. Even something as simple as his name, which has some special significance we'll get to in a moment, is flipped around. It's clear that Capcom wanted to turn the legend on its head from the start. This is made clear in some of Great Ace Attorney Chronicles bonus content, wherein art director / character designer Kazuya Nuri talks about Sholmes' appearance. Nuri's objective was to create a, quote, unique take on the classic detective. Aesthetically speaking, the steampunk look certainly meets that criteria, but there are internal qualities that the team was looking to spotlight as well. Nuri describes Sholmes as, quote, a man whose striking appearance is only diminished by the striking erroneousness of his transcendent deductions. For all of Sholmes' observations and deductions and occasional elitism, he gets it wrong every time, the complete opposite of the true Holmes. This irreverent take on the man is immediately clear when we first meet him aboard a boat in the second case.
So the victim was a Russian man then, and the letters are well formed, suggesting he was compos mentis at the time. This is a most extraordinary script. And evidently not penned by the same hand as this message.
Without spoiling the specifics, the conclusions you just saw Sholmes reach in this cutscene are completely incorrect.
Bit of an insult to my legacy there, but I can take a jest.
This erroneousness, as Neri put it, is a key part of the game, namely in the Dance of Deduction, a mechanic in which you stand alongside Sholmes and correct his observations to ascertain the real truth. It's a really fun part of the game, letting you follow along with Sholmes' deductions, making changes to keywords that eventually lead to radically different conclusions. Mechanically speaking, it's an important feature for the sake of gameplay. It wouldn't be very fun if Sholmes came in and just handed over all the correct answers. Thorough investigation has been a key component of the Ace Attorney games from day one. But in a grander sense, it gives us a chance to go toe-to-toe with the world's most famous detective. Being in the same room with him is cool, but one-upping him and proving our own intellect is even more satisfying. In fact, this one-upping of the detective is exactly what Maurice LeBlanc did with his gentleman thief character, Arsene Lupin. Some 20 years after Sherlock's debut, LeBlanc wanted to create a foil to the world's greatest detective. Thus, his stories star Arsène Lupin, the world's most infamous thief. You might recognize Arsène as the name of Joker's persona from Persona 5, an RPG with overarching themes of crime. And his surname, Lupin, may remind you of Lupin III, the anime and manga series about the grandson of the original thief. The Arsène Lupin stories turn the Holmes mythos on its head. Arsène outwits him a handful of times, in the same way that we get to outdo him with the Dance of Deduction. What's more, Holmes and Watson's names were actually altered for these stories. They became Herlock Sholmes and John Wilson. Sounds familiar, right? Capcom used the same names for the Great Ace Attorney, which, in a literary sense, signifies the goal of skewering the Holmes legend.
Again, I can take the insult. I can take it.
Thus, we have Maurice LeBlanc and Capcom, two creators that were perhaps tired of the same old Sherlock Holmes, subverting his adventures for the sake of creating something new and exciting. But it all started with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and those original mysteries. Sherlock graced the pages of novels, short stories, and eventually Japanese magazine translations, as tales of the world's greatest detectives spread all over the globe. In Japan specifically, the stories caught on at the perfect time, embedding themselves into the minds of schoolchildren and influencing a changing culture. Over 100 years later, the same stories served as the basis for the Great Ace Attorney games. Just as Japan opened up to outside influence back then, Capcom eventually opened up the Great Ace Attorney to a larger audience with a worldwide release. If you're thinking about playing the collection, or trying the Ace Attorney series in general, I wholeheartedly recommend it. You'll get to tangle with legendary characters, solve cases, and bring justice to those in need.
Thanks so much for watching this video. If you like what Framework is doing, definitely hit that subscribe button in the middle. It would help me out an awful lot if you do. And if you want to see what we've already cooked up, you can hit that link on the far left. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.